would love to hand this over to Mirabella. Thanks so much for being our student moderator, and I will pass it off to you.
Happy to do so, Cassie. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you are all doing well. As Cassie mentioned, thank you all for being here. We have a great program for you today. My name is Mirabella Johnson. I am a second-year student at Northwestern studying global health and cognitive science. So you all are free to reach out to me as a fellow student. And Cassie will be helping me today, again, moderate the chat, see any questions you have, and then at the end, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions after we go through our prepared questions. Again, we have a great lineup of alumni speakers here today to share their insights with you, specifically about their language majors, which is a really cool area that I know we're excited to share with you all. Once you hear about them for about 40 minutes or so, again, we will take questions from the audience. At that time, as Cassie mentioned, if you want to turn on your mic or just simply submit them through the public chat, we can call on you or we can read your question aloud from the chat. So without further ado, I'd love to get started with introductions. Let's start off with Dana, if you don't mind.
Yes, hi, thank you, Mirabelle. Nice to meet everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Dana Jennings. I went to Northwestern, graduated in 2006, so it's been a while. I was an Italian major at Weinberg and currently work in environmental sustainability as a program manager at LinkedIn. So excited to connect with you on LinkedIn since I work at LinkedIn and excited for the conversation today. So thank you. Pass it to Ian.
Thanks, Dana. Ian Reinhardt. I graduated in 2011, a German and international studies major. I also work in the environmental space and specifically work with climate and clean tech companies and help them scale by understanding policy, politics, and regulation. And we work with everyone from small startups to large companies you've heard of, like Google Nest, so the thermostat division of Google, and Stripe has a really big climate portfolio.
Thank you, Ian, and then we'll pass it on to Kia Bet.
I was muted. Hi, how are y'all? I'm Kia Bet Osuna. I graduated from Northwestern in 2011. I was a major in Spanish. I think I was a poli-sci major as well, double major with a minor in Latin American studies. And now I am a associate immigration attorney at a firm in Dallas, Texas. I work in a primarily criminal law firm that does immigration. So I work doing removal defense, which is primarily non-citizens who are in immigration court because of the fact that they were either caught at a port of entry or that they were caught by immigration due to a sort of criminal encounter. So I work here. I've done this work for a few years, but I'm doing criminal defense immigration now. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing about yourselves. We are excited to have you today. Now I'd love to jump into the first question that we have for you, which is, can you share with us some of the impactful classes or experiences in your undergrad that led you to pursue your major, and also related to that, like how your major impacts your career today? So if we could get started with that with Kia Bet, that would be wonderful.
Yes. So actually one of the classes that most impacted me, and I think even continues, that I still continue to think about, when I started in doing Spanish classes, it was primarily, I am a native Spanish speaker. So the first class that I took was Spanish for Heritage Speakers with Professor Jeannie. And that one was a class where I didn't realize that I, as a native Spanish speaker, could actually move on to speaking and writing in a more academic Spanish, which is a more formal Spanish, one that I had never been used to before. And that was the gateway into another class that for me was Latin American revolutions in Central America. It was revolutions in Latin America. And that one was such a mind-blowing class because it was a perspective of history that we don't usually see in our country. It was more from the perspective of countries that have had US intervention and how that actually leads to displacement of Latin American peoples. So after that, it just kind of was like the whole world was revealed to me in a way that I had never thought about before. I was more aware of the plight of Central Americans and Latin Americans, even being the daughter of Mexican immigrants. It was just nothing that I had ever heard about before. So that actually comes in handy when I talk to Central American, Latin American displaced refugees, and I'm able to get an understanding of their home country and their history and what leads to their displacement and leads to, you know, migration in the United States. So those two classes for me were the ones where my perspective shifted, I think. So it was just, it was really crazy to think that if it hadn't been for Northwestern and those two classes, I don't think I would have been on this path ever.
Thank you for sharing. That is a really cool experience. And that ties into my follow-up question that we'll touch on later, which how you use your major in your work now. So I'd love to pass it on to Ian.
Do you want me to answer that one or the first one?
Whatever your heart desires. Basically, again, any classes that impacted you, that kind of you use in your major today, what led you to pursue that major in the first place?
Great. Well, right, German. I was a German double major, and like there's just subtext with Germany that's like more than just Nazis, like great rich cultural history. Though actually we should probably talk about Nazis now, it's still relevant. But like you know, there's Goethe, there's Kant, there's all these like great thinkers. Like, you know, there's, for those of you in the arts, there's Bauhaus, there's like beautiful cinema in the 20s, there's like the foremost democracy in the 20th century, like falling and succumbing to like fascism. So yeah, we should talk, like, let's still talk about that, but like, love the rich cultural history, and I would encourage anyone, whatever language it is, like you can basically find that anywhere in the world. And like, that's actually one of the values of speaking another language and immersing yourself in a culture. I went abroad for a year. I was in Tübingen, which is a small city in Germany, for a whole year. And that was such a formative experience. And it was actually, I got into sustainability by studying Germany's investments in renewable energy. They call it the Energiewende, or the energy turnaround. And even as you're probably hearing stuff right now with like Russia and Ukraine, a lot of that centers around a threat, an implicit threat to not export gas to Europe. So Europe's incredibly dependent on Russia for gas imports. And so that it was a mixture of that and other aspects of Germany's history that really led them to invest pretty heavily in clean and renewable energy. And that actually got me down my own path of comparing comparative political economy of like, why is Germany investing? What are they doing? How does that compare to the United States? So I would say my major really started me down the track that I'm on now.
Wonderful. And Dana?
I would say for me, my story is not quite as, well, I guess it's interesting in its own way, but I signed up for intensive Italian my freshman year because it was the one language where you could do the 2-year language requirement in 1 year and be done. And that was my plan. And ended up, I just love the teacher. I don't know if she's still there, Giulia Guidotti. She was just the best teacher. I was a terrible foreign language student. I had such a hard time. I was struggling more than anyone. I had no foreign language experience before that. And she just really like made it all click in my head. And so I would say definitely she was the most impactful part of my journey at Northwestern, because then I liked it at the end and I stuck with it, went abroad for a year. Met my husband, who's over there in the other room. We have kids, we speak Italian today at home. So it was like life-changing for me. So I would put that as the course. And then I also forgot to say I was a history minor, and I took a lot of African American studies courses, which was a new program back then. And I feel so grateful for everything I learned back in the day, because it's really helped shape my views and some of like the environmental equity work that I work on now, and just understanding things that are happening that are more current in our country. And so I think I would put those probably as the top two.
Thank you, Dana, Ian, and Kiavet. Those are some really awesome conversations and make me excited going into our next question. So I'm sure we have a lot of students here, maybe from all majors, but even language majors that have no idea where they'll end up going after college. And they're like, okay, I'm here at college, now what? So in that respect, what was your first job out of college, and how did that impact your career path going forward to where you are at today? So if we could start out with Dana, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned I met my husband. So then we did long distance senior year. So my focus of senior year was going back to Italy, being with him, and just figuring out whatever I would do for money that would make it work. And that definitely set me apart from everyone else who was going into investment banking and all these things. But I'm so grateful. Obviously, I did for, personal love reasons, but also because I just moved back there. Instead of being a student, I actually was working. I taught English in all different situations in Italy, preschool, public school, university. I went into businesses. I taught retired people in the evening. So we had all sorts of great touch points with people all across the different age spectrum in Italy. So I taught English there for 2 years. And then how that pertains to my career now, I did have a pretty drastic career shift that I'll talk about later, finding my passion and moving into that. But being a teacher abroad taught me so much that I use today, including communication and presentation skills. LinkedIn obviously is a global company. I work with teams all around the world, and I feel like I know how to communicate and connect to people in ways that some, I think, Americans who haven't had those experiences don't know how to do. And so I think it makes me really effective in my job. And yeah, that's how I would summarize it.
Thank you, Dana and Ian.
So yeah, I ended up writing I wrote my undergraduate thesis about Germany's renewable energy policy. And then I ended up finding a job here in Chicago at the German-American Chamber of Commerce, which, like, most practically for everyone, they put on a Chris Kindle market downtown every Daily Plaza. You should all go. It's awesome. You eat a bunch of German food, but they also do like business things, like helping German companies enter the US market. And so my first job was helping German. Yes. And it's great. It was like really crowded this year and like stressful because of COVID, but it's great. They also help German companies enter the US market. So it's focusing on German renewable energy companies who wanted to know about wind and solar, or actually Wisconsin's great for biogas because there's a lot of like cows and paper and stuff like that. So that was my first job. But I think like a couple things for people, like I think people like y'all are probably increasingly impressive and maybe have a path of what you want to do. I just want to say, like, I didn't know, like, there are some gaps. One skill you'll use in your career is storytelling very well and crafting that narrative of who you are. And that can change over time, but like I jumped around a bit and I ended up doing a Fulbright back to Germany through Northwestern a year after. So I worked for a year, and then it's going to sound like really good. It's going to be like do as I say, not as I do. But I did a Fulbright back to Germany to continue the renewable energy work, and that's just another great note for students, especially like language ones. Like, you can get sponsored through Northwestern like a year or two after graduating too. So that was just like a plug to like keep exploring programs and continue to be like affiliated with the university in that way. And that was my first. Yeah, that was my first job. I'll save the rest. I only have like 3. I only have like 3 lessons, so I got to share them. I got to sprinkle them.
No, thank you, Ian and Kiavet.
So I'm actually like really surprised that I'm talking to like even Northwestern alums and there was no path, because that's definitely the theme after I graduated too. I was so completely lost. So my family lived in Texas and Dallas, and I just went to Chicago, ended up there, and I graduated and I had no clue what I wanted to do with my life. Not sure. So, but I did know that I had to pay back loans at some point. So money and free rent were important to me. So I moved back home and I spent the summer applying for jobs, just really anywhere that would take me. I was doing publishing, I was doing legal, I don't know. And my first job was actually at a nonprofit in Dallas, so wild, and it's called Human Rights Initiative of North Texas. And what they do is they work with refugees and victims of violence or domestic violence who are in the United States. And Texas is just a big immigrant community, and Dallas is apparently just a hub for a lot of immigrants as well. So I was their executive assistant. So I was like a front desk person. I was making pennies, and I basically did screening. So anybody would call in about, I'm seeking asylum, I was a victim of a crime, I was abused. What are my options? And since we were nonprofit, it was, free of charge. So it was a big opportunity that a lot of immigrants were looking for. And I was just the face of the place. And I loved it because I was the first voice and the first person that people saw. And you just got to hear these really overwhelming stories. I really was just their ear. I just received this information and then I gave it to people that knew what to do. So I don't know if my role actually had a lot, but it just made such a huge impact on me that kind of like was another point in my career where I shifted. But that was not what I was intending to go into. It was not something where I was like, I want to work at a nonprofit. It just, that was what was available to me and I needed a job. So it ended up being one of the best jobs of my life though.
Thank you. I find that personally quite reassuring, and I'm sure other students do as well. As I've had conversations with many other Northwestern students, it's okay, I'm here, this is awesome, I'm gonna have this awesome degree, but then what? And so to hear your pathways is really inspiring, and the fact that you have had such successful careers thus far, but we're in the same situation as we were one day is really helpful. So thank you for sharing that. Moving on, and on a similar note again, do either of you or any of you have any favorite jobs that throughout your career that aren't currently related to what you're doing, or could be what you're doing? Maybe that is your favorite job and you finally found your niche. So we'll start off with Kiabet. So
that was my first job out of college, besides lifeguarding, which was a lot of fun. You get to tan for free. But that was my first job out of college, and that was an immigration related. And after that, I only had immigration related jobs. So it didn't once I found my path, it spoke to me, and I realized there was no other job, there was no other direction. So since then, I've only worked in immigration. So my resume is tailored to immigration, which is a positive thing and can also be, not so positive thing if I ever decide not to be in immigration, but I don't think so. So that was my favorite job just because it inspired me and it taught me what being a good attorney is like. And it's more than just knowing the law. It's about being a kind and understanding human, which I think is just a lesson that really anybody, that works with people just has to know. And that's something that you don't really learn at school, right? There's no how to be kind, how to be a good person 101. So that was just a really wonderful job. And then since then, I just got more involved in the actual legal stuff, but that one was the one that anybody can be a lawyer, but not everybody should. And that was the heart, right? That was the heart that just came in me and was if I love this, then I can figure out the law, right? You can teach that, you can learn that, but that it was just everything for me, of just knowing that this was a community that I deeply desired to commit myself to and serve, and that I don't think there was much information about that. I don't think immigration was much as a hot topic as it is now. And so that, as a little baby 21-year-old, was just, it blew my mind. So first and only job. And I was very happy with that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Ian?
Yeah, super cool. I really like the impact of my current job. I work a lot with startup founders and people who are figuring out how to scale a business and impact, and hopefully positively impact the climate. But I'll talk about, I think, where I pivoted, how I got into this was, I was in Chicago after graduating. I mentioned I got Fulbright, and then I ended up applying for a number of jobs. Unfortunately, moved to DC for this company called O-Power, and they were pioneering this concept of behavioral energy efficiency. So if you guys have read nudge, any sort of this nudge theory, they were doing that for energy efficiency. And I got the opportunity to work at basically a high growth startup, which was just super exciting and thrilling. And hopefully we get to return to the workplace in some capacity if folks want to, but I think that was a really formative experience for me. And, part of, I say this because my role ended up being, was on the client facing side. So we sell a product or service, and then you have clients who you manage. In our case, we work with utilities. In Chicago, it's ComEd. Actually, ComEd was someone I worked with. And I find that a lot of the skills that you gain in your undergrad, the ability to think across like disciplinary lines works really well in an organization when you need to bridge the gaps between different teams or understand different perspectives. And so I think you can bring, I will say, like, I think a strength that like I think Weinberg majors should have is like to bring this mixture of like quantitative and qualitative skills and this interest and this curiosity. And like there are a lot of people who are specialists and they're like really solid, and that's great. You need some of that, but you also need people who are like putting, you know, 2 and 2 and maybe 2 and 2 and 2 some more together. I think that's 10. And I got to do a lot of that in my job. The company ended up going public, so IPOing, and then actually getting bought by Oracle, which was my least fun, like less fun part. Dana, I wish we'd gotten bought by Microsoft. That would have been more fun. But that was just like a formative experience for me as well. And like I think a way where like I didn't realize it, but we're using a lot of my undergraduate skills as well.
That's wonderful. I really like to hear how you implemented your skills from your undergrad. That is especially impactful, especially because I think some students are like, well, why am I even doing this? But the fact that you're able to put this into your career is wonderful.
Look, as a generalist, like a lot of people here will be more generalist. So this is like my generalist bias, but like, I think you, in a lot of ways, and you're seeing this with like, whether it's AI or anything, it's like you can develop something that's very good at like one thing. I think there's like an increase, this is just like my bias because this is like my skill set a bit, but like there is a value in being able to like stitch together these like disparate ideas and bring up variety of skills. And I think it is something that's very much valued in the workplace. So fear not, everybody. And if you're a specialist, by the way, that's great too. Like I got to work with people who are like way more brilliant than me in a variety, and we need that as well. So I don't want to knock specialists.
Thank you, Ian. And Dana?
Yeah, I think it's interesting what Ian said about generalists. I would agree. I think for me, I've always been drawn to learning something I know the least about, which is not a very good like specialist approach, but it's how I've always been. So like studying Italian and African American studies and history, those were 3 things I knew nothing about. And then kind of realizing after graduation or after college, I taught English for 4 years and I liked it, but I thought, I think I want to try to save the planet. Like the planet is in peril. And then I realized, wait, I don't know anything about environmental science and climate change. And so I had to kind of start going back to some night classes. And actually to the question about a random job, I needed to start developing some experience I could put on my resume to go to grad school. And so I started volunteering at an aquarium in San Diego. And that was where I got trained in climate change communication. And it was really impactful to me because I remember super well that first day they said, okay, just before we get started, here's a piece of paper, like write down, how would you tell someone what climate change is? And I was like, I don't even know. Like it was so confusing. And then they provided clarity. And then I realized that's what I want to work on. And so kind of move forward. I think Northwestern, just being a generalist and open to like realizing there's so much I don't know and then trying to find out more about things I don't know, I think gave me the courage to do a career shift. And once I realized what I wanted to do, and even now in my career, I work with a lot of specialists, a lot of, climate scientists and policy specialists and energy consultants. And I value all of them. But I know for me, I love my job so much because I get to do all sorts of stuff and like tap into these people, but bring it all together kind of in a chaotic, multifaceted approach, which I think was the reason why Northwestern was also a good match, because you could kind of pull together different pieces. So hope that made sense.
No, it definitely does. And that is actually the perfect transition, Dina, to our subsequent question where we kind of look more into your path at Northwestern, how you feel Northwestern aided you. You can talk about your major, or you can just talk about the general arts and sciences background and how that plays out in your work from day to day. So if we could start off with Dana, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah, I think I touched on it in the last question a bit in terms of not being afraid to dive into things I don't know. And I'm not sure what else I would add really from that. I think, it was definitely a lot of the writing and communication skills that came through. And yeah, I think I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And Ian?
Yeah, definitely writing and communication. I mean, like, it's like a lot of life. And I mean, Kiva, I'm sure I don't know how much you do with like depositions or writing, but it's like there has to be a clear thesis up front, right? Like any sort of paper, and then you expand upon it and conclude. And like I do that a lot in my like formal written communications. You would be surprised how many people are like not great or like not clear, and you can just make such a big difference by like clear and effective like written and verbal communication. Is this wait, what was my prompt? I was just tuning off a little.
No, you're fine. It's
Okay.
been touched on a lot throughout the conversation, just casually, but I was curious, how did your degree or your Northwestern background, where you have that interdisciplinary, arts and sciences background, how did that help you in your day-to-day career?
I talked about it as well. This is again like another do as I say, not as I do, because I wish I'd done more of this, but like I think the ability to take like a mixture of like quantitative and qualitative classes, like I will say like a class, like if you're interested in computer science, if you're interested in data science, like all those skills are going to be really valuable, particularly the ability to mix like quantitative and qualitative aspects. So like not just like looking at numbers, but being able to interpret them and understand what they say. And like maybe you mix that with like, deep interviews with like a small subset of people. Like those are all skills that are like super, whether you're doing that for like ethnographic research or great data science, love it, or whatever you're doing it, like that can be applied in like a variety of concept or of context. So I think that's all really, really applicable stuff. And I think probably the final thing is like just the ability to reflect and think like critically. Like what I love about studying Germany, and I'm sure it's wherever you're studying, is just the comparative aspect of it. So inherently, when you're saying like, what does this one country or society look like? I think you're comparing it against like, well, what does that look like in relationship to the United States? Like, what do they do well that we don't do? What do they do well, but like might not work well in the context of the US society for like XYZ political, economic reasons? And I think like frequently those are skills you're using in like a business context to answer a lot of like really, sometimes mundane, but sometimes really like interesting questions.
Thank you, Ian. And I'll pass it on to Kiabet.
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys are hitting the nail on the head. I think that, and it sounds reductive, but at the same time, it's just, that's the core of it. I think that at Northwestern, and especially at Weinberg, I learned how to like read, think, and write, right? Like that's how I have two younger sisters. So whenever they're having, questions about college or anything like that, I'm like, look, can you read, think, and write? Then that's really much all, it sounds so simple, but it means so much. And thankfully, being a double major in Spanish, I was able to read, think, and write in English and in Spanish, which is my job, right? That's what I do. And again, it sounds reductive, but it's not. I recently was doing a hearing, like a merits hearing, a final hearing, and I'm with opposing counsel. It's going in this wildly different direction. They're questioning my client, stuff that we were not prepared for, and you just have to think on your feet, right? How do you take these questions? How do you analyze it? How do you flip them to best serve your client? And all the while thinking of case law and how to analyze it and, get the best outcome for your client. So I'm thinking and I'm talking on my feet. One of the jobs that I also had after law school was being a clerk for immigration judges. And so you get handed a file about a person. The judge gives it to me and says, figure it out. Tell me what it is. So read, think, and write again, right? And that just is so invaluable because you realize, I think, as you go out into the world, what a skill set that is. And it is surprising that it's not as easy as you think, right? Or as others think. It really does take a certain person. And I think Northwestern, it wouldn't be Northwestern if they didn't have the professors or the education or the coursework of that caliber to really get you out and have those skills. So, and I think even professors too, when I was kind of waffling with what to do with my life, I had some professors that were like, you might think about border issues. And I was like, that's crazy. Why would I, who, my parents obviously crossed the border, why would I care about border issues? But they started kind of leading me. So you have these professors that have your well-being in mind and can kind of see something that you can't, doing that. And And in Weinberg, I think too, once, you know, I'll talk about my career path, or my path in college, but I was not into this at all. I didn't think that. So when I failed out of chemistry and had to do something else, you have this wide array of classes. It's just kind of overwhelming at the same time. But like you guys, Dana and Ian both said, it gives you the ability to kind of bop around and, you know, find out where your love is or where your interest lies. So I had that freedom definitely to do that, because otherwise I would have just been sad and crying in my dorm all the time.
Thank you, Kiavet. So we've touched on majority of our prepared questions through this conversation, and I've truly enjoyed it, and learning about your degrees and then your subsequent career pathways. So I'd like to diverge a little bit to ask you all if you want to contribute anything about your careers now, or I have a prepared question that just came to mind when talking to you all, which is, if you could go back in time and you had the chance to go through college again, would you end up picking the same major, you think, or would you have done something differently? Would you not have done a language major? So we can start off with Kiavet, or if anyone is really passionate about talking about either their career or that, you know, major decision if you had the chance to go back.
And I'll go first unless you guys are good. So I started off being a bio pre-med. I had applied for, what is that, the honors program in medicine. And that's the reason why I went to Northwestern, thinking it's doctor or bust, right? Daughter of immigrants, first gen daughter, it was doctor. And that was the path for me. So I was only taking science and math courses for 3-4 quarters until I realized I was horrible at them. And so for me, I would not change anything. I had to take Spanish classes. Because otherwise, again, I don't know where I would be. I would be in for a world of hurt. I would, you know, gosh, I should not have stayed in science. Otherwise, if I had been a doctor, I would be causing some serious harm. So it's a good thing I didn't. So it was the most wild and unexpected ride that I would have ever imagined. I do remember going to school and saying, I don't want to be a lawyer. I don't know what I want to do, but it's not going to be a lawyer. Absolutely not. And that's what I ended up becoming. So without Spanish, you know, that heritage Spanish speaking class, I wouldn't have known that Spanish can be formal, Spanish can be academic, and that fulfilled my, you know, my need for academia. And then I wouldn't have wanted to learn more about, what about other people who speak Spanish? What's their story? And taken political science classes. And then I actually studied abroad in Argentina as well and focused on literature. So I think all those things were so necessary for me to get to this point that if I had done what I set out to do, I would not have ended up in this path. So I just kind of had to let go and let it happen. So absolutely glad that I took Spanish, because I spend the majority of my day speaking Spanish. It feels weird to speak English during working hours because all my clients are primarily Spanish speakers. So it's Spanish 24/7 here. So I definitely needed that, because then I also have very educated clients who have definitely corrected my Spanish before. So I need to be on my game, or they'll say, you know what the situation is like in Venezuela, right? And I need to know what the situation is like in Venezuela. Otherwise, they do not feel comforted by that fact. So it, you know, would not change anything. I would probably take more Spanish classes if I could.
That was really cool. And I love that you touched on your pathway and how you had this, you know, kind of set mindset and you completely diverged. And I think that's really helpful, because a lot of students, I think, change their major a lot. And then again, it feeds into that belief that, what am I going to do after college? So thank you, Kiavet, for sharing that. I really appreciate it. And Ian?
I mean, no, I definitely would have kept no regrets on my path, though. I mean, now you're telling me about this cool data science major, so maybe I will maybe I would have sprinkled that in. No, I'm kidding. I think there's really no, by the way, there's no wrong answer, and there's probably no right answer. There's maybe like on the margins, like slightly more like marketable degrees, but you know, if you want to go into consulting, they take all majors, right? Like there's not, you just have to be competent, and I assume that everyone here is probably competent at Northwestern. I just one thing I want to say. So I, in the middle, started like my own company for a couple of years, focused around conservation fundraising, which is only like 3% of all charitable giving goes to the environment and animal welfare. It's actually sad. I didn't fix it. I ended up like not fully solving that problem. But it's just a note, like entrepreneurship's like really big. I don't want to discourage anyone from being an entrepreneur, but I'll say there's like a lot of skills that I have gained through like working in other fields that I wish I had had when I was trying to start my own business. And I think like there is, I think you don't need to feel, I've probably some of your like friends, if you're starting a business, that's awesome, do it. If you know people are, that's kind of enticing, but there's also like, you should just be trying to gain skills and understand, like pursue things that you're interested in with, and that all comes in handy. And so sometimes you can have impact by working at a company that's having impact and really like excelling there. I think there's really no wrong, and you'll find like after doing that for a certain number of years, you're better equipped to know what the real problems are and to start your own business. So I just want to give a plug, like if you're an entrepreneur, that's great. If you're not, like find companies or people or individuals that are doing things you like, and like, you know, try to work for them or work with them.
Thank you, Ian. And Dana, would you change your major, or are you happy on your with what you did in retrospect?
Yeah, so mine ended up being such a part of my personal life through a love story, Northwestern study abroad love story, that I couldn't change it. But I think for me, majoring in Italian let me be in Italy for a whole year without worrying about what exact credits, because everything that you took in Italian there would just transfer in as an Italian credit. So when I came back, that was kind of like the de facto, like, okay, well, I've got this going, so I'm just going to follow this path. And so I think for me, no, I would keep it. It's been just such a blessing for me to speak a second language since Northwestern till now. I mean, like I said, we have children, we're raising them in Italian. They speak to me in Italian. We read Harry Potter every night in Italian. Like, it's just so fun. It's so great for the brain. I love keeping it alive. I love we watch all the Netflixes in Italian, you know, when you have kids. So I think it's just been such a part of my life. I can't imagine it otherwise. Did I have to major in it? Probably not. But by majoring in it, it allowed me to spend that time abroad. And so I also wanted to just say one last thing, which is I remember kind of listening in and attending these kind of things when I was younger and always being like, well, that's great. It all worked out for them. Like, but that's their story. Like, what's mine going to be? And being kind of annoyed when I would hear people like, oh, just, yeah, it's all going to work. So I just wanted to like bring that up front, that I understand that feeling too, and not being sure that my experience then means you're going to have like this great experience. And so just, you know, everyone has their own thing going on. So I just wanted to let you guys know I can empathize with that feeling. I've felt that myself.
Dana, what's Harry Potter in Italian?
Harry Potter, same
Okay.
name. Yeah, they do change some of the names, like Dumbledore, Silente. Like, it's interesting to see what did they change and what did they just kind of, you know. So there, I could go on about it for a while. We're in the fourth book.
Awesome, thank you so much. Now that we've gone through the questions, I'm going to pass it back over to Cassie, so she can start to engage our students in the questions they have.
Absolutely, thanks, Mirabella. And Mirabella, I'm going to remove your spotlight, but let me know, just chat me if you get any questions from students. And students who are on the call, I will just encourage you all to send in your questions. I already have some really fun ones to get us started with questions, but send them in now throughout the rest of the hour. And I have to ask, did you guys watch the Harry Potter special now that we're on this topic? Did anyone know?
I want to, but I'm like too bad. Like, I read the whole series a long time ago, and now I'm rereading them, and so I was like, I can't go there because I actually forgot how it all ends, so don't tell me in the chat. So I haven't, but I want to.
Spoilers.
Yeah,
yes,
I know. It's like when you actually forget all of that, the answer is yes. If you let 15 years go by, you could forget.
It was a fun one. I recommend it. Some tears were shed. But I will start with our first question. We have a fun one, Dana. A budding abroad relationship was started, and this student is a computer science and Korean major, studied abroad in Korea and met their boyfriend there. So now we're thinking about possibly living in Korea. They want to ask for advice on searching for jobs and networking abroad, might teach English through a Fulbright at first, but still want to get a computer science job. So any advice you might have. I also recommended they reach out to you on LinkedIn directly for further insights, but.
Yeah, I think it's not easy, especially back when I graduated, there wasn't as much, you know, of visibility online of jobs. So I stumbled into teaching English because it was kind of the thing that I knew how to do because I spoke English, and realized I actually really liked it. I think probably kind of a funny part of our story, which I probably shouldn't share it to everybody, but is I had thought that I had my whole visa thing worked out and I was about to move there. And then 2 days before my flight, I went to the Chicago embassy and discovered that my visa had been rejected, and there was no reason for that. And I had a complete meltdown on Michigan Avenue, sobbing. I had my boyfriend there. We had an apartment. I had a job. And so it was a very dramatic moment in my life. And I decided I'm just going to go anyway, because as a US, you could just enter for 3 months, like as a tourist, and figure it out. And like a month later, we got married in the Italian courthouse. So then once I did that, everything kind of cleared up and I could get any job over there. But I'm not recommending that everyone follow those steps. But that's just like a fully transparent story that I thought I would share. And it's worked out. We just celebrated 15 years of marriage, so we're doing okay. But it was not smooth. I did not have a Fulbright or sponsor. I was kind of just out there blind, making my way forward.
Oh my gosh, Dana, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing. Yes, I'm sure that no one will replicate that exact story in their path, but wow, absolutely. And I have another question that came into me from Shira asking about language minors. So maybe we can, go through our panelists on this one. Do you think if someone is contemplating adding a language minor, they should do it, or is it not necessarily necessary? Like, what's your perspective on adding a minor, if anyone wants to get us started?
I would recommend it, especially if you are interested in that language. I think that it gives you, I think studying a language, it uses the other side of your brain that you don't. And it's just the thing, you have that fun little brain break, I think, of, I'm saying this as a native speaker who ended up being Spanish major, but even then I feel like you activate a part of your brain that's, thinking about different things, and you're wording it and how you're thinking, and you get to read. And for me, it was for fun. So even though it was about maybe reading about globalization in Latin America, you get to read, and it's about making your own analysis. So it's kind of like this hybrid, like almost sort of English courses type thing. But then you can go into, do you want to learn more about politics? Do you want to learn more about music, art, or heritage, whatever, and just in that language. So I think sometimes for me personally, my experience was that at Northwestern, it was just about very rigorous, hard sciences studying, right? And there's that perspective sometimes. But I think it's also a time to explore your interests and learn so much, and you have so much available at your fingertips that it's a why not, right? If you are interested, I think you owe it to yourself to enjoy what you are studying. So even if a minor is just like the perfect way to say, you know what, I enjoy this, why not? And I don't think you're ever going to regret saying, I know how to speak a language, so-and-so. I just don't think that's ever a negative. So go for it, right? It's worth it.
I love that, Kibet. Absolutely. The recommendation. Does anyone else, Ian or Dana, have an opinion on adding a language minor?
She said it well. I'm for it.
Yeah, that's one of the benefits of Weinberg College, right? Is being able to study these various interests, which is great, and something that I appreciate you all encouraging. So I see some more resources being shared in the chat, which is great. Thanks everyone for helping with the sponsorship question. I had another question from a student earlier today ask, what is the process like how difficult is it to get into a PhD program for a foreign language coming from Northwestern? Curious, I know, Kia, that you had mentioned this being an interest area of yours. I'm not sure if Ian or Dana considered this path, but I'll throw it out to our panelists.
Yeah, so after veering from pre-med and before law school came into being, I figured the only path that I have forward is to become a professor, because I was surrounded by professors. And so maybe this is a totally different experience for y'all, because when I was at Northwestern, there was no graduate department for Spanish yet. And I remember talking to, oh my gosh, Professor Uzlangi, I don't know if she's still there. She's my hero. And she told me, you know, we need to get a graduate program because, you know, we need people like you here. And I was like, maybe when you have it, you can let me know. But they were totally willing to help me with research. They were totally willing to hook me up with other professors at other departments, because they come from, you know, they were like, oh, I know somebody at Brown, I know somebody at Yale. And I didn't realize that to be a professor at Northwestern, you kind of have to have, you know, you do have that background of, and this network is just amazing. So they knew, you know, do you want to go to Texas? Because we can reach out. Emily McGuire, I think, is another great source for me. I'm still in touch with her, and I know that she went to UT Austin. So she was telling me, if you want to go to UT Austin, I know about that program. So I took the GRE and I was planning for that. And then I realized I didn't have a research project in mind, but I had professors that were telling me, you know, follow up with this paper, keep up with that, and then they'll get to you. So I think with Northwestern, and this is what I tell a lot of friends or other family members that I know who didn't go to college, is that Northwestern opens a lot of doors. Northwestern is a world, like definitely nationwide, definitely worldwide name. And so there's always going to be somebody from Northwestern in every pocket of the world. So I don't think you can go wrong with just having those relationships with that professor, because they'll definitely have somebody, you know, and if you have an inkling of an interest, they definitely know, I know somebody who kind of did that, go forth over there. So I didn't fully flesh it out, but I feel like now if I had an idea of a research project, I would go back in time and I know exactly who to go to. So it's kind of crazy how Northwestern really is just that community, and you can definitely use those vast networks all over the place.
I appreciate that. Yeah. I saw Dana shake her head with considering the PhD. Ian, did you consider that path? No. Yeah. Thank you. This is really helpful. Another student asked, does Northwestern have any connections with the State Department or embassy programs for foreign language majors? And I know, Kia, that you said the network is out there, but does anyone, you know, I know we have some study abroad people, any advice with connecting with the State Department or embassy programs?
So I went to a couple of like their, what were they, like get to know us type thing. I think I did for a couple for like the CIA and the Secret Service, which were like really intense. But they definitely have those. So I would just, that was in 2007 to 2011 when Facebook was still new. So I feel like now there's just way more information out there. So I would just say keep plugged in, go to those and actually talk to them. With LinkedIn, what I still do is I just creep. Like I'll go to LinkedIn, the, you know, consulate, and see who's there. And sometimes I'll just reach out or start liking posts and just cozying up to people. But I definitely know people from my study abroad program. One went to like Georgetown, I believe, that has a strong like foreign service officer program, and he's involved in that, or people started working at consulates. I know a woman in my class who ended up working at the consulate in, gosh, Riyadh, I believe is where she's at. So I was actually considering working as a consulate because being a Spanish speaker down at Ciudad Juarez, but didn't go as planned. So I think as long as you just keep on those and really reach out to anybody, there's bound to be somebody that you know from Northwestern at that program. So just, you know, or you'll find out the other connections. It's just a matter of networking, getting out there, but definitely go to those courses because they're really serious about them. They're really serious about them. If you want to, it's just a matter of putting yourself out there.
Love it. Yeah. Thank you, Kia. And Ian, Dana, any other advice with that, the State Department and embassy programs? Any experience? in that area?
Just
Sorry.
just a bad one when I got my visa rejected and decided to never work in bureaucracy. No, I'm sorry, I don't have information on that.
I don't really either. I will say if you're interested in like the foreign service exam is based, it really helps if you have like a undergraduate degree from Weinberg. So like I took it and like you just, I think you'll have a lot of that knowledge. So if that's something you're interested in, you can take it while it's fresh right after you graduate, if that's a pathway that you're interested in.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And people think it's really hard. I'm not trying to like, but I found that like the skill, like the knowledge I'd had from Northwestern, in addition to some US history, which I had to like brush up on, like prepared me pretty well for the written exam for the Foreign Service. It's just a note for folks.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And Shreya, I see you sent in a question to the public chat. So I'll call on you and see if you want to turn on your microphone and ask some follow-up questions here.
Yeah, thank you. I know I have some background noise, so please let me know if it's too hard to hear. Nope. Okay, thank you. So I just wanted to ask, do you think it's a better idea to pursue international or national programs after graduation if our goal is eventually to work for a federal agency? So like, say I wanted to do a career in finance, should I try to look for finance opportunities internationally or within the US if like eventually I would want to move into a role working for the government? I don't know if that's too niche.
No, I think the answer, and I'd be curious to hear what others say. I think it probably depends. Again, this is probably a good network opportunity if there's someone who, I'm sure there's someone who has your experience who you can talk to and ask these questions. I think like generally looking for like respected accredited programs, it probably depends what you want to do. My inclination is like finance might be helpful to have like a US focused degree, but like there are like, again, if it's like international finance, like maybe it makes more sense to be in the UK or do something in like, I don't know, Hong Kong or wherever that might be. I'm not an expert on that. I'm sure there's right answers both ways. And I think a good way to get that answer is to identify a person or a few people that have a job that you want and like look at their path. And like, I think this is just like a big ad for LinkedIn, Dana, but you can use LinkedIn to do that like pretty well.
Yeah. And I don't really have anything to add, but just working at a large company like LinkedIn, Microsoft, that has operations in all countries, even if you start out maybe in a role that isn't like what you want to be in forever, but you're in a global company, then again, it's like the network, like you can, message people in finance that work in different countries and ask them. And like, so I guess my point is, if you work for a large organization, then you can start to have conversations, and they generally will have like career programs built up within the company. And so you can have those chats. So sometimes you might want to end up looking at the company you want to work for or the role, but they both have value, I think.
I think Dana, I think you make a really great point where you can just, I think our tendency sometimes is to kind of set a path for yourself, that makes sense. But I think, and what I've seen, not just in my personal experience, but in other colleagues from Northwestern that have gone on to do really great and amazing things, is that, yeah, you're right. They'll look into LinkedIn and be like, that's the kind of role that I want. So this is where I'll go from there. So I think even if you do like national, obviously you can connect it to, a national firm or, a government sector that you want. And I think even if you do international, I think what matters really is that you know how to link it, that you know how to connect your story and say, doesn't matter if you do something international, you can always tie it back into, now you are an expert, you can do comparative analysis. If you do national, now you're well known within that field in that regard. I worked at the Department of Justice for a few years, and people that even weren't in immigration found a way to tie it in. So I think it's just a matter of what role do you want to do, what is your interest, and how do you, there's nobody else that's going to be doing the path that you're doing. So I think there's always a way that you can link it and move it over. I think I knew somebody that started working at Visa, just wanting to do kind of like a program, and then she ended up moving abroad and starting her own business in Africa. So it's just, but she has that business background and that information about how credit agencies work. So it's really been amazing to see how it's just a matter of how you take your experiences and you just link them, right? And it just makes you that much more of an interesting and stronger candidate for any positions that you want in the future.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like I hear that theme on a lot of these alumni panels that I do is how do you tie your interests and your roles into the narrative you want to share for whatever, if it's a career pivot or like our students right now starting their career, right? Like how are they tying in their Spanish, their German, their Italian interests into a career in finance, consulting, teaching English, whatever it is, right? I think that's so great, Kiabet, and such a great way to kind of tie in and close out our conversation today. It has been such a great hour with you all. This has been so informative and inspiring. Appreciate our alumni for joining us and sharing all this really great insight and advice for current students. Of course, Mirabella, thank you so much for being our moderator today. Excellent job conversing with our alumni, sharing more about the student experience. And students, keep an eye out for an email from me. I'll share our LinkedIn information from our panelists, and you will also be receiving a $20 Grubhub gift card. We normally buy you lunch at these panels. We can't do that right now, so we're sending Grubhub gift cards. So more information on that to come. But of course, alumni, thank you so much for being here and sharing your experiences with students today. We hope you all have a great rest of your day. Go Cats!